All right, guys, you're all very welcome. Welcome to the Canarian International Meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. My name is Mossy, and I am an alcoholic serving as your secretary today. Could you join me for a moment's silence to remember the still suffering alcoholic both inside and outside the room? And Matthew, will you put up the... And Kathleen's going to read the... Oh, no, Caroline is reading the preamble, isn't she?
Yeah.
Yeah, hold on now. Caroline? You should be unmuted there. Caroline, where are you going to be? Caroline, there you go.
Thank you so much. My name is Caroline. I'm an alcoholic. I am 2 years and 1 week, 7 days in recovery. And I say that because I'm in awe of AA Fellowship and the members, and I appreciate everything. The original version of the current preamble, as it was first introduced to AA in June 1947, Grapevine. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other, that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. As there are no dues or fees, it is not allied to any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution. It does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and to help another alcoholic achieve sobriety. Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline. And thanks, Caroline. The chat is now disabled until the end of the meeting, except for meeting hosts. If you feel the security is at risk at any time during the meeting, please private message one of the co-hosts so they can check it out. We'd also suggest that you're mindful about sharing your private information in the open chat, and perhaps only consider sharing your email address in the first instance instead of a phone number. At this meeting, we use the raise hand function for the sharing part of the meeting. If you wish to share, we invite you to put up your virtual hand after the lead speaker is finished and not during. Anyone identifying as an alcoholic is welcome to put up their hand for a request to share. So please don't be shy. We'd love to hear from you. And we're not doing the blue card. There's no speaker's choice, so it's straight into... Brian is going to read his story from the big book, Window of Opportunity. It's a pleasure to have you here with us, Brian. I know everybody's excited to have you here. And you do what you do best, dude. Thanks a million.
Hi, everybody. I'm an alcoholic. My name is Brian, and it's good to be here sober today. My sobriety date is June 27th of 1984. I am a member of the There's More to Life group located just outside of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and I have a sponsor and sponsor people down the line, and have for a long time, and really have had that life transforming experience that Alcoholics Anonymous offers to alcoholics through the practice of the 12 steps, what in a shorthand we call a spiritual awakening. So Mossy, thank you so much for inviting me. And before I say anything, thank you, the group, so much for being on camera. It makes such a difference. It's so good to see people's faces. And I always find it so much more difficult to talk when I'm looking at whatever their avatars are, or whatever the right word is. So good to see you. And I don't want to say that little guy over in my right hand is my favorite picture on there, but he's definitely near the top. He's adorable, and so glad to have him here. So I'll start with the reading here. The story is called Window of Opportunity. This young alcoholic stepped out a second-story window and into AA. I got sober while I was still in college. Once outside of a meeting, I overheard a conversation between another sober student and a woman who lived in the town where I went to school. She was explaining why so many local residents dislike the students. She described the common perception of students as arrogant and self-centered, and went on to tell the following story. I am a nurse and I work in the emergency room. 2 years ago, a student was brought in by ambulance in the middle of the night. He had gotten drunk, walked through a second-story window, and fallen 20 feet headfirst into a concrete window well. He was brought in covered with blood. His head had swollen to the size of a watermelon. He kept swearing at the nurses and doctors, telling them to keep their hands off of him and threatening to sue them. He was, without a doubt, the single most obnoxious person I have ever met. At that point, I interrupted her. That was me, I said. That was my last drunk. I had walked through that window when I was 19 years old. And no surprise, that's not where I was planning to go. And nor was it how I expected that day to end. I will mention, because I know I saw him. There he is. The other student is my friend Tom Kay, who is on here, and Tom was my very first real friend in Alcoholics Anonymous. The first person that I actually really did stuff with and connected with, and after I got sober and would mention this sort of how things had ended up for me falling out the window, a lot of times people would come up to me after the meeting and say that they remembered that they remembered reading about it in the paper, and that they had prayed for me because, in some sense, they understood what was wrong with me long before I did. And and there was something to me so appropriate about the fact that I fell at the end, and I sort of fell right into the hands of AA and somebody doing it. And it's funny, I sort of sitting here right now, you might see me move my head back or move my head. The reason is I still get double vision as a result of my head injuries. And so I'm adjusting, or if you see me close one eye while I'm reading, that's actually all that's happening. It's I still get double vision every day as a result of this. But other than that, I remarkably defied all odds, and since I was not expected to survive, initially, because I'd lost so much blood, and then was, when I got stabilized, the expectation was that I would never recover meaningfully from it because I had such significant head injuries, and I don't really know why I did. I mean, I don't pretend to know why I did, and some people don't. But what I do know, and what has become just increasingly clear to me over my time in AA, is that I have been on borrowed time for a long time. And the question is, what do I do with it? Can I use it in a way that is meaningful? Really, that idea, if we try to be of service to God and the people around us, or am I going to try to use it for something else? And my experience has been, the more I try to use it to be of service to God and the people around me, the more rich and full my life is, and the more it continues to grow. Now I've walked all the way back away from the text to let me walk back to it, because Mossy's probably thinking, oh my God, is he ever going to read the next paragraph? But how had I gotten there? I had always been a good kid growing up, the kind of son other mothers loved. I was at the top of my classes academically and had been in almost no trouble for the first 17 years of my life. I would like to say that was because of my well-developed moral fiber. In fact, much of it was a result of fear. My earliest memories included threats by my parents to throw me out onto the street for the slightest act of disobedience. The thought of being forced to live on the street is pretty terrifying for a 6-year-old. Those threats, coupled with a fair amount of physical punishment, kept me frightened and obedient. All of that is true. The important thing, I think, that I needed to learn myself in AA, and so I want to emphasize here, is that's not why I have alcoholism. I just have alcoholism. That shaped other aspects of my life, and it shaped my experience of things, and maybe created things I had to be relieved of over time. But in practice, and I think God released me of all of that. But that didn't give me alcoholism. I got it, my brother didn't, and I don't know why, but that's the way it worked. So, and my sister didn't either. My late sister didn't either. So, as I grew older, however, I made a plan. I would be dutiful until I graduated from high school. then I would escape to college, secure my economic future, and never go home again. Just after my 18th birthday, I left for college. I was, I thought, finally free. I was in for a rude awakening. Like many alcoholics, I had spent much of my life feeling different, as though I didn't quite fit in. I covered those feelings and my low self-esteem by being one of the smartest people in any group, if not the smartest. I'm not sure that's exactly how I wrote it. That might be an editing thing. If it's how I wrote it, I have more humility now than I did then. But who knows? Additionally, I became a performer in crowds, always ready with a quick joke to point out the humor in any situation. I managed to bring a great deal of laughter into my life. I went to a college filled with people who had also spent their entire lives at or near the top of their academic classes. Suddenly, I was no longer special. To make matters worse, many of them had what I only dreamed of, money. My family was strictly working class, struggling to get by on what my father earned. Money had always been a big issue, and I equated it with security, prestige, and worth. My father was fond of saying that the sole purpose of life is to make money. I had classmates whose names were household words that connoted wealth. I was ashamed of my family and ashamed of myself. My shaky confidence crumbled. I was terrified of being found out. I knew that if others discovered who I really was, they wouldn't like me, and I would be left alone, worthless and alone. In the fourth step, in the resentment piece of the inventory, we look at the people, institutions, and principles that we resent, or that in some way for me that creates unmanageability, particularly with the principles. And I struggled with the principles idea for a while because there were things I could see maybe fairly clearly, thinking of like honesty as a principle. And I didn't like honesty because I felt bad when I wasn't honest, and when I was, things didn't work out well. And so so in some sense, it was your fault that I had to be dishonest because you can't handle the truth. In other words, you won't like the truth if you see it. But I think the more inventories I did, the more it became clear to me that the idea of those principles are really some of those things that are underlying everything about our lives. These things that are driving me. And one of them was this for me: if you know who I am, everything falls apart. So the whole game is to make sure you don't know who I am. And I got really good, in the way a lot of alcoholics are, of moving from situation to situation, clicking on the mask. I come into this room, these people are interested in this, click, I'm interested in that as well. And then I leave and it's something else. And I tried to do that in AA. It doesn't work in AA. There might be other places where it does, but it does not work in AA. But and I had to get relieved of that through the practice of the steps. Then I discovered alcohol. I had tried it a few times in high school, but never enough to get drunk. I knew that getting drunk meant being out of control. My escape plan required that I always keep my wits about me. I was too afraid to be out of control. When I got to college, however, that fear left me. In order to fit in, I pretended at first that I had as extensive a drinking history as any of my classmates. It was not long before my history surpassed everyone's. My drinking career was short and destructive, and my alcoholic progression was very fast. I got drunk for the first time in October. By November, people were willing to wager money that I could not go 1 week without a drink. I won, and in celebration drank myself sick. By January, I was a daily drunk, and by April, a daily drug user as well. I didn't last too long. Living this was incredibly painful, but in hindsight, I got the gift of rapid progression. That some people don't have that, and they bounce along for a long time. And that's their experience, their story. They might think that's a gift. I don't know. That's how they might experience it. I was the opposite. I mean, it is, for whatever reason, I said like neither my brother or my sister got alcoholism. Sorry, my iPad does that. I think I got enough alcoholism for all three of us, I guess. But because whatever happens in me, once I started drinking, it is the only way I describe it is it's like game on. I mean, I drink, and I mean, I drink so quickly and so much. I cannot get it down quickly enough. Describe myself as someone. The only way I could have gotten down more quickly is if I'd had a second throat, because I pour it down, and I'm a guy who pours it down so quickly. Sometimes I throw it up, and I just keep pouring it down until I get stabilized so I can keep drinking. Not understanding at all, thinking that's genius, and not understanding at all when I'm in it, that is because I am in the grips of a craving. That's that physical craving that doctors have been described, triggered by the drinking. So, as I look back on that period, I realize how true it is that one of the primary differences between alcoholics and non-alcoholics is that non-alcoholics change their behavior to meet their goals, and alcoholics change their goals to meet their behavior. Everything that had been important to me, all of my dreams, goals, and aspirations were swept away in a wave of booze. I realized quickly that I could not drink and function at any high level. That did not matter. I was willing to give up anything so that I could keep drinking. I went from being a solid A student to nearly flunking out of school, from being anointed a class leader to being shunned as a pariah. I almost never went to class and did little of the required reading. I never attended any of the many cultural events sponsored by the college. I forsook everything that makes college worthwhile in favor of drinking. Occasionally, some sliver of pride would work its way through the chaos, resentment, and fear and cause me to look at my life. But the shame was too great, and I would drive it back down with bottles of vodka and cases of beer. And it was that thing of everything I wanted. If I couldn't have it and drink, I would immediately take less. And I'd say the less is fine. And if I could work out a reason less was actually your fault and not because of the drinking, that was even better, despite that haunting scratch all the time that knows I'm lying to myself. And the thing I came to learn about this really as kind of over time in sobriety is that is not a symptom of drinking, it's a symptom of alcoholism. And unchecked, if I'm not really engaging in spiritual growth and spiritual fitness, I will do that same thing. I will live that same life, except instead of it being drinking, it will be self-centered fear. And I will live a diminished life, trapped by self-centered fear, the whole time trying to come up with some reason why it's not me. And it becomes that kind of chip away. And the very gift I've been given, I will squander. And I've gone through periods where I certainly have done versions of that. But at least for me, the gift of staying engaged is through inventory, through working with other people, that shows up, and it becomes impossible not to see. Because my college was fairly small, it did not take long for me to come to the attention of the college deans. It was under their watchful eyes that I first agreed to enter counseling. While the administration saw this as an opportunity to help a troubled student, I saw it as a bargain. I would go to counseling to make them happy, and they would owe me one. Not surprisingly, the counseling had no effect. My daily drinking continued unabated. And how that happened, how I got into counseling, is that I was in all kinds of trouble. So this dean knew who I was, got called to his office, and I went in, and another friend of mine was there. And he said that she had come to him because she was afraid I was drinking myself to death. I was 19. And he was the one who set up this arrangement and said, you can go to counseling, you don't have to go. And I heard it as, Brian, please do a favor for me and go to this counselor, and I'll owe you one. Now that's how detached I was from reality, because whatever he was thinking, there was no sentence that was going to end with, and I'll owe Brian one in his head. I'm positive about that, but that is how I processed it. About a year later, I realized that I was in trouble. I had failed a class during the winter term. I had rarely attended and had not turned in the term paper on which 50% of our grade was based. The spring term was looking equally bleak. I was enrolled in a class that I had attended only once. I had not written any of the required papers or bothered to show up for the midterm examination. I was bound for failure and expulsion. My life had become unmanageable and I knew it. I went back to the dean who had guided me into counseling, and for the first time, admitted to myself and someone else that I had a problem with alcohol. I didn't think I was an alcoholic. I wasn't even sure what that was, but I knew my life was out of control. The dean allowed me to withdraw from that class the day before the final exam on one condition. I had to enter a treatment center. I agreed. A few days went by. With the pressure lifted, my life did not look so unmanageable. In fact, it looked as if I was back in the saddle. So I thanked the dean for his help, but told him that I would be okay on my own. I did not go to a rehab. 2 weeks later, I walked through a second-story window. And that whole thing about the rehab, I'll never forget it, because it was, I knew I was going to fail. I was going to get expelled. And for the first time, it became clear to me, just that this has something to do with my drinking. I have not been able to go to a single class because they meet in the morning, and I cannot get up from them because I'm drinking every night. And I mean, as crazy as this seems, I didn't really see that before. I saw it as, oh, it's their fault, everybody else. If my parents had money, I wouldn't have to do this, blah, blah, blah. But I could see that. And when I went to him, I really went with this earnest feeling of there's something wrong with me. And it was on a Friday morning. He got me out of trouble, and in exchange for the agreement to go to rehab. And really, by Friday I was going to go, Saturday I was going to go, Sunday it was fuzzier. By Monday, people go to rehab because they're in trouble, but I'm not in trouble. So why would I go to rehab? That way, that the delusion of alcoholism, recurs. By Monday, I can't even remember what the trouble I was in on Friday. And that's what it looks like to me. After insulting the emergency room personnel, I slipped into unconsciousness, where I remained for 5 days. I awoke in a neck brace with complete double vision. My parents were furious. I was flown home and the future looked bleak. God's timing, however, is impeccable. My college had a long history of drinkers, including Dr. Bob. At the time of my accident, the deans were assessing how to respond to student alcohol abuse and were waiting to try out their latest idea, Alcoholics Anonymous. I was the test case. They told me in no uncertain terms that I would never get back into this college unless I went to AA. Under that pressure, I went to my first meeting. Looking back, that may have been the first healthy decision I ever made with respect to alcohol. One definition of a bottom is the point when the last thing you lost or the next thing you are about to lose is more important to you than booze. That point is different for everyone, and some of us die before we get there. For me, though, it was clear I was willing to do anything to get back into school. And I think one of the things that I misunderstood when I came into AA was what I would hear people talk about a lot of external events, and the DUIs, the divorces, the lost job, blah, blah, all that sort of stuff. And I would think that that's the bottom. Now, I had almost died directly as a result of alcoholic drinking. Somehow, though, I repackaged that as kind of just a one-off bad luck. And then I thought, well, I've never had a DUI. I didn't own a car. I had never officially been fired from a job because I just stopped going. And so they didn't actually have to encounter me to tell me I was fired. And I'd never been divorced because I'd never been married. And so there was a part of me running through all that stuff of like, had I really hit bottom? Did I belong? Had I hit bottom? All that kind of stuff. But it was really seeing that a bottom is not what happens on the outside. A bottom is what happens on the inside. That if a bottom was something that happened on the outside, we could manufacture. If a bottom was getting a DUI, we would take people to a bar, get them drunk, work with the police to be waiting for them when they come out and get behind the wheel of the car, arrest them, done. If it was a divorce, we go to people's spouses and say, you've got to leave. And once you leave, she or he will get sober, whatever it is. You've got to fire this person. That's more helpful. But none of that's true. The bottom really is what is happening inside of me that's making me willing to change, to do something different. And really that is different for everyone. And far too many of us do die before we get there. But I went to my first AA meeting with absolutely no idea what AA was about. I'm from a large Irish Catholic family and have had several relatives in and out of the program. AA, like prison, was shameful, however, and was never discussed. I also had no idea what alcoholism was. I remember a girlfriend once told me that her mother had a drinking problem, but that she was not an alcoholic. Curious, I asked what the difference was. An alcoholic, she told me, is someone who needs to drink alcohol every day, even if it is only one drink. A person with a drinking problem does not have to drink every day, but once she starts, she cannot stop. By that definition, I was an alcoholic with a drinking problem. A witticism I decided not to share with her at that time, and the thought that it would kind of spoil the moment. But that was how little I understood, and so I was surprised by my first meeting. It was in a church, and whatever I had expected, it was not this. The room was filled with well-dressed, smiling, happy people. No rancid coats or 3-day beards, no bloodshot eyes, wheezing coughs, or shaky hands, but laughter. Someone was talking about God. I was sure I was in the wrong place. I was predictably late to my first meeting because I was trying to cut it perfectly close. So I just showed up right at the beginning and I misjudged. I didn't want to be there early because then I might have to talk to someone. And so I misjudged the timing and I came in a couple of minutes late. And I was in a church, went into the basement. And even though somebody had told me this was where it was, when I sat down and they were talking about God, I thought I had gone into the wrong room. Because I knew nothing about AA. I'd never heard the phrase 12-step program, never heard of higher power, nothing at all. I didn't even know you weren't supposed to drink in AA. I knew there were meetings and I knew what the word anonymity meant. And that's the full extent of my AA exposure. So I really was, when this woman started talking about God, I thought I was in the wrong place. And my plan was, once she finished talking, I would slide out the room because I do have that great alcoholic escape skill, and that I would slide out and just go figure out where the room is, where the alcoholics were. Then a woman introduced herself and said that she was an alcoholic. I knew then I was in AA. She spoke about feelings of insecurity replaced by confidence, fear replaced by faith, resentment replaced by love, and despair replaced by joy. I knew those feelings. I had insecurity, fear, resentment, and despair. I could not believe it. Here was a person who was happy. It seemed like a long time since I had seen one of those. And I remember that woman's name was Helen. The woman who was speaking when I came in, it's funny things I remember. The woman who was speaking when I came in, her name was Leona. And the first woman I ever heard introduce herself saying, I'm an alcoholic, her name was Helen. And where I got sober, the custom was to say your sobriety date as well. And hers was in November of 1964. Seems like an odd thing to remember, but the reason I remember it is because I was born in September of 1964. And when she said her sobriety date was in November 1964, I'd never heard the phrase sobriety date, but I knew she meant she hadn't had a drink almost my entire life, which made an impression. I mean, it was that mix of doesn't seem possible, doesn't seem desirable really, but it does seem like a long time when it's, your entire life basically. So but the other thing that jumped out from her, and as it went around the room and people shared, was they were talking about what was happening inside of them, not so much about the external stuff, but about their experience of it. And I heard that, and I didn't come from a world where we talked about that. We might have talked about what was going on inside other people, but not inside of ourselves. And these people were open about things I had never said in my life. And they were talking about being on the other side of it, which I didn't even know was possible. Um, I mean, at best, I would have guessed everybody gets dealt their hand, and my hand was, insecurity, fear, resentment, and despair. Those are 4 good cards. Other people get, success, happy, power, property, prestige, whatever they get. But these people were saying they had been where I was, and they were now somewhere else, and that made an impression. After the meeting, people welcomed me with open arms and gave me their telephone numbers. The discussion meeting was followed by a speaker meeting where I had my first awakening in AA. The speaker said, if you're an apple, you can be the best apple you can be, but you can never be an orange. I was an apple, all right. And for the first time, I understood that I had spent my life trying to be an orange. I looked around at a room filled with apples, and if I was understanding the speaker, most of them were no longer trying to be oranges. And I remember that moment, like the feeling of that moment, like it had just happened today. That when he said that, it was oh my God, I'm an apple. That's it. Because if you ask me, what do you want to do? It's someplace else. Where do you want to be? Somewhere else. Who do you want to be? Anybody else. And this guy was saying for the first time, really, what I thought I was the only person in the world who felt. And I understood that at least there was some hope going on of all this stuff. My progress in AA, however, was slow. I refused to go to meetings outside of my neighborhood, which meant that I went only Tuesday and Thursday nights. I always felt better after a meeting. I remember times when something upsetting would happen on a Friday, and I would tell myself, I wish it were Tuesday so I could go to the meeting. No matter how many suggestions I heard and how many rides were offered, however, I simply would not go to meetings on those other nights. People gave me many other good suggestions as well. They suggested that I stay out of relationships. I was young and single, and I rejected this idea out of hand. For the first year, I bounced from one sick relationship to another. They suggested that I get a sponsor. I had no idea what a sponsor was and was too proud to ask, but I was sure I didn't need one. After all, I was smarter than the rest of these people. They might need someone to tell them how to run their lives, but double vision, neck brace and all, I was doing just fine on my own. People suggested that I find a higher power. I was not fooled. I knew when they said higher power, they meant God. And I knew that God waited for me to step out of line just once so that he could take his revenge. I wanted no part of God. And I think I did have that fairly common problem, AA problem, which is like everybody else in AA, I saw myself as slightly more insightful than everybody else around me. And that I was uniquely situated to be able to get what you got by doing less. And so what I'm listening for is, what do you have to do? And my goal is, how little of that can I do and still get as much as I want? And I'm willing to throw away some things. You guys are talking about, service, and I'm so spiritual and blah, blah. I'm thinking like, that's fine. I have no interest in the service, no interest in the spiritual. I want what I need. I thought were 2 things, basically. I used to say a job, but that's not really true. Money, a source of money, like low effort, high reward, and a relationship, low effort, high reward. And that was it. And I thought if I had those things, I'd be fine. And part of it was, I thought, because I was so much younger than most people, that would be it. And so I didn't need any of this other stuff that these people needed. And I certainly didn't want any relationship with God. I had very conflicted feelings about God. The best way to describe it is, I would have been an atheist, but I was afraid God would send me to hell. And so it was that kind of tension all around this stuff. So with this resistance, I plodded along for a few months. Whenever people asked me how I was doing, I would say, fine, just fine, no matter how hard I was crying inside. Then I reached the crossroads. I was sober about 6 months, and I was not getting any better. I contemplated suicide almost every day. My emotions swung between paralyzing despair and murderous rage, often in the space of a single moment. I was not happy, joyous, or free. I was miserable, and I was sick of it. I decided I had had enough. I went to my Tuesday night meeting fully intent on sharing honestly. I arrived at the meeting, and no one else was there. This meeting, which routinely numbered 20 people, was empty. I waited for a few minutes and was waiting to leave. I was preparing to leave when a man whom I barely knew walked through the door. He suggested that he and I have a meeting. I was sure it was a bad idea. He asked me how I was doing. That was all I needed. The pain, fear, misery, anger, loss, resentment, and despair came pouring out. For the next 45 minutes, I talked at this man, who continued to nod his head, smile, and say, "Yeah, I remember feeling that way." For the first time, I made completely honest contact with another human being. I showed someone who I really was without fear of rejection. I took an action that was designed to make me feel rather than just look better. I was met with acceptance and love. When I had finished talking, he told me something simple. "You don't have to drink over it." What an idea. I had thought that situations made me drink. If I was angry, I drank. If I was happy, I drank. Bored or excited, elated or depressed, I drank. Here was a man telling me that, independent of my life situation, I did not have to drink. If I stuck with AA, I could stay sober under any and all conditions. He gave me hope, and in many ways, he symbolized the door through which I finally walked into Alcoholics Anonymous. And that was a remarkable encounter for me. I mean, my very favorite AA pamphlet is A Member's Eye View of Alcoholics Anonymous. And there's a description in there about the desire we all have. The phrase that Guy uses is to stand naked before another meeting, meaning to stand completely stripped of all pretense, stripped of all defense in front of someone so that we can be raw, available, who we are, and exposing it all. And that's not where I came from. I'm coming from the place of you can't know. And as a basic rule, before I said something, I know the filter should have been, before I said something, is it true? That should have been the guiding filter. That was not my filter. My filter was, what effect do I think what I'm about to say is going to have on you and on what you think about me? And that's the filter that was driving everything I said. And so when people in AA said, "How are you doing?" I'm like, "Oh, fine. Yeah, let go, let God." Meanwhile, I'm dying inside. And this guy, when I sat down with him, he was what the big book describes as someone properly armed with the facts about himself. He understood the illness, understood the solution to it, and was willing to share it with me. And it was years before I saw something that that for a long time, like in the moment, my experience of this really was, I show up, nobody else is at the meeting. The coffee's all set up and everything, and everybody else is gone. And my feeling was, this is so typical of my life. I need it, nobody's here. If anybody else needed it, the room would be overflowing. But Brian needs it and nobody shows up. It took me years before I understood the reason nobody showed up was because I didn't need a meeting. I needed the opportunity to sit down across the table from someone who understood what was wrong with him, understood the solution with it, and was willing to share with me. Sometimes, and that is, I'm a huge meeting guy. I love meetings. Please don't take this the wrong way. But sometimes in a meeting, the very last thing we're capable of doing is what that guy did for me. Because sometimes we get so worried about people feeling bad that we try to make them feel better in the meeting by clapping and cheering, whatever we do. And this isn't about feeling better, it's about getting better. We need to be honest with people. And I got that from this guy. Funny side story, I ran into this guy. So I went to meetings with him regularly for the rest of that year, and then I moved away. I was sober about 16 years, and I was in Mass I got sober in Pittsburgh, I'd moved away. 16 years later, I'm back in Pittsburgh in Mass, and who sits down in front of me but this guy, Tom F. And I thought, it's remarkable. So I am ready to relive this great AA moment. There's Ebby goes to Bill goes to Bob, they go to Bill Dotson, blah, blah, blah. Tom sits down with me, kind of all the same level stuff. And I reintroduce myself so we can relive the great moment together. And not only can he not remember the great moment, He has no idea who I am. He cannot remember me at all. And it was just such a powerful reinforcement that we should always reach out our hands, because we never know who's going to be on the other end. And we never know the gift we might be able to give them if we're willing to participate. And my great obstacle has always been, I would love to participate, but I have so much to do. That voice is always in my head. And I learned how to get past it. I needed to turn to God to be relieved of it. That's one of the ways the bondage of self operates for me. And so I began to change. I began to pray. I became actively involved in working the steps. I had previously dismissed them as the tools of mental inferiors. Now I embrace them as the rungs on the ladder to salvation. I began working with a sponsor and became active in my home group. I did not understand how making coffee or cleaning up after meetings could have anything to do with staying sober, but older members told me that service would keep me sober, so I tried it. It worked. My life began to change. Just before my first anniversary, I was readmitted to my college. I arrived back on campus terrified. All I had known there was drinking. How was I ever going to stay sober under these conditions? The answer was simple. I threw myself into AA. Some very loving people took me under their wings. I had the opportunity to perform a fair amount of 12-step work with other students, and by the time I graduated, there was a thriving AA community at that school. And Tom who's here with me today, was a critical part of that. This will give you some sense of my delusion, though. So two of the people who were incredibly kind to me, there was this couple, Joan and Gage, and they really took me under their wings when I moved back to New Hampshire. And they made sure I got rides to meetings. They tried to welcome me into the fellowship. Often, because I was young, often people in AA, even through the first year, would connect with me or try to connect with me by saying, I have a daughter your age, or I have a son your age. And Joan and Gage had a daughter who was about my age. And this is how delusional I was. When someone would say to me, I have a daughter your age, I was convinced they were trying to set me up with her. These, of course, were people who knew me. I guarantee you the very last person anyone would have set up a daughter they loved with was me. And so at that time, but in my head, that's what these people were all trying to do. I was such a catch, I guess. After graduation, I attended law school. I arrived to find an AA that was very different from that to which I had grown accustomed. I was sure I would get drunk because those people weren't doing it right. My sponsor back at college, aware of my propensity for finding fault, assured me that if my new friends were not doing it right, it was my obligation to show them how. So I did. Driven by fear and conceit, I set out to remake AA in my image. I am certain that if membership had depended upon being liked, I would have been expelled. And as I've joked with people subsequently, if you want to become the least popular person in Alcoholics Anonymous, it's actually really easy. Move to a new place and say two things. Number one, you don't know what you're doing. Number two, luckily I'm here. And it's a tricky thing about moving, and I had that version. After some time, I called my sponsor to report my progress. He stopped me short with a simple question. These people who aren't doing it right, are they staying sober? I admitted that despite their failings, they were staying sober. Good, he said. You have told them what AA is. Now it's time for you to listen to figure out how they are staying sober. I followed that suggestion and began to listen. Slowly but surely, some wisdom and humility began to creep in. I became more teachable. I found God working all around me where previously I was sure I had been alone. When I opened my eyes enough to see the miracle, I found that it was right in front of my face. I was growing in God's love. And that gift he gave me I couldn't have articulated it then, but I came to understand it over time that one of the ways the bondage of self manifests itself for me is that what is going on in my head is far more interesting to me than what is coming out of your mouth. And so I At my worst, when I have a conversation and I'm caught in that, I speak, and then I'm starting to collect my thoughts and taking a break to do that. And then you're doing something, probably talking, but I'm not listening because all I'm thinking about is what's going on in my head. And that's why I would have conversations where I would start talking again, and it was awkward because they were still talking as though they didn't know that part of the conversation was over. And I talk over people and all that stuff, and it was my inability to listen. And we talk all the time about how God speaks through other people, and that's true. But if I can't listen, I can't hear it. And this opened that door to me, and I started saying a prayer that, and I still say it every meeting now, which is the prayer that I can be able to carry and receive the message. I need to be clear. St. Francis prayer talks about we want to be a channel. I need to have that clear. And when I'm bound with my own chatter because of my own self-centeredness, I can't be there. I was fortunate to have an opportunity to spend time abroad during law school. That was something I had dreamed of doing while drinking, but when push came to shove, I drank. Now sober, I've been in meetings in probably a dozen countries, and I've always been amazed at the message that transcends all linguistic and cultural differences. There is a solution. Together we can live soberly, joyously, and freely. And one story I've shared about that with many people is I was traveling at one point, and I was in Belgium and in Bruges, and there was a meeting. I was in a meeting in Flemish, which I speak no Flemish, and there was a guy there who spoke English and Flemish who was sort of acting as kind of like a half translator for me. But one guy shared, and when this guy finished, my translator turned to me to say something, and I said, "Did he say blah blah blah, whatever it was?" And my translator said, "Yeah, I thought you didn't speak Flemish." I said, "I don't, but I know what that feels like." That's what the language is. Bill Wilson wrote about this, that our experience of that connection actually transcends language, if I can be present for it. My life has been one of great joy. I am now 33 years old, written a while ago, and God willing, in 1 month, I will celebrate my 14th sober AA anniversary. I am surrounded by loving friends on whom I depend and who depend on me. I have reconciled with my parents from whom I had been estranged. My life is filled with laughter again, something that alcohol had taken away. I was married shortly after my 9th anniversary to a loving woman. 1 week before my 12th anniversary, our son was born. Through him, I learned more about unconditional love, the value of wonder, and the sheer joy of being alive. I have a wonderful job that most days I appreciate. I am active in AA service work and have both a sponsor and several sponsees with whom it is a privilege to work. All of those are gifts from God. I express my gratitude by enjoying them. And that's what I thought gratitude was about, walking around all the time with like, "Oh yeah, look, I'm so happy." I don't think that's it at all. I mean, that can be the experience, one experience of it, but it really is about, what am I doing? Am I giving back? Am I using these gifts as a way to give back? And so I'm still married to the same woman. We celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary in October. And I've often said the same thing, which is I know my low standard that I'm about to say, but during those 30 years, I've never cheated on my wife. I've never come close. Never hit my wife. I've never come close. Drunk or dry, untreated alcoholism, I would have done both. That, because I had terrible problems with rage, unable to stay connected with anything. That's what I would have looked like. And I don't have to be there. My son is now 27, and I have a 16-year-old daughter as well who wasn't born when I wrote this. Same thing. I've been able to be meaningfully present in their lives the whole time, in a way that I would have been totally unable to do, but for what AA gave me, and totally unable to do even if I had managed to keep down a drink. I once knew a woman who was crying before a meeting. She was approached by a 5-year-old girl who told her, "You don't have to cry here. This is a good place. They took my daddy and they made him better." That is exactly what AA did for me. It took me and it made me better. For that, I am eternally grateful. And so, Mossy, thank you so much for asking me, and I thank you all very much for listening.
Ryan, That was absolutely amazing. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thanks so much, man. That really meant so much.